I'm Claude Kistler. I'm General Manager of KSPS Public Television, and I want to take you on a little bit of a tour of our studio facilities and what we have as resources for community productions, studio activities, and give you a lay of the land of what we have and some of my philosophy about community production, about how we need to be a conduit for community dialogue and information and conversation, and how we form a broader concept in the use of resources for public media in the Spokane area. I see kind of a similar theme to what we used to do is bringing people in, talking heads. I mean, there's always this controversy or this dilemma about, oh, it's just a talking head, it's people talking. But when people have important things to say or good or valued things to say, it's great television. You know, Charlie Rose, for example, is a very good program, and it's just a small set, very basic background, and two people talking about issues of value and importance, and that's what I would like to see out of community programming, community access, community origination, whatever you want to call it, is how do we get more people to participate in a dialogue in this community on a variety of subjects, whether it's about clean air and clean water and parks and politics or what have you, is a forum and a conduit. How do we become a better conduit? How does public television become a better conduit? How does community-minded television become a conduit for greater discussion and conversation and the back and forth of ideas and dialogue in a community? That's good and healthy and fresh, because we've got issues. There are 2 or 3 or 4 major issues all the time that we ought to be talking about in a community and a region. And you know, we can mirror. Hopefully we can partner in a production in a journalistic way with other conversations that are taking place in print through the Inlander or other areas out there where we don't always have to kind of create. It's just how do we partner with and bring in those voices, bring in those ideas and concepts, so that we can be a conduit for conversation in the community. That's what I value most out of a studio. I think the thing that people most underestimate is the fact that it really does take time. It takes a concerted effort to produce and to make the phone calls and to schedule people and get crews and make sure that things are, you know, in place. I mean, when we see the finished product and we see what comes out of the studio, oh gosh, that's a simple enough show. Anybody can do that, or everybody can do that. But it's not necessarily the case. It's calling and scheduling and coordinating and talking about topics and getting questions and panelists, and is it live? Is it call-in or those kind of things? So it's not simple. It's not as simple as it looks. It still takes a concerted effort, and that takes someone who is going to follow through from beginning to end on making sure we've got things scheduled, we've got the talent scheduled, we've got crews, we've got guests and those kind of things. So it really takes a concerted effort to follow through with that. We need to determine how we get a model and how someone takes the show, takes it over, and then, in a sense, brings it in, brings all of the elements in, and maybe they bring their own crew. And I mean, we've got to have. We're not terribly union structured here, but we need an operating engineer and that type of thing to oversee the use of the equipment and making sure it's working and this and that. But I kind of see that yeah, a community group, community organization could kind of come in with their box of people and crew and talent, and here it is. It's set up and it's ready to go. It sure could, yeah. Whether that's a complement of equipment that we have here, or again, it's equipment in a box. It's a TriCaster system that comes in, and off you go. In my own mind, I think we have to work with some of the impediments or some of the obstacles to getting into this building and using this facility to make it easier, because I just think it would be a misuse of resources to go out and find another building and find lights and put lights in and a whole nother structure and a whole nother overhead. How do we have the conversation in this community with our licensees and our requirements to overcome the obstacles to make this more of a community facility as well? I mean, that's what I think would be most efficient. I think the next step is to just have several people around the table talking about, well, what are the expectations? What can be provided in terms of the physical plant and the support and the facility, and what comes with it? Do you just get the shell of the room, or do you get the operating equipment and everything else that goes with it, and lights and microphones and switching? I mean, we've got a whole other switching setup back there, and special effects and all those things I mean, you don't use special effects during most talk shows and things like that, right. but graphics and titling and those kind of things. Yeah. Well, somewhere behind the curtains or in the other studio, we've got a ladder that goes back and forth, and the person physically climbs the ladder and re-aims and adjusts the lights and coordinates it with whatever's going on with the lighting control panel there. I mean, this is a standard background, but we've got some other set pieces and things like that. Yeah, there's different colors and backgrounds, and there may be something that a person wants to be unique to the particular program that CMTV is trying to do, and we have it built and designed, and maybe it stays up here, and yeah, then when it's needed, you pull it out of the back room and hook it up, and there you go. I mean, we've got tables and things like that can support that kind of a production activity. They're relatively open. Our most heavy use is during the membership campaign. Spokane Schools is in here, you know, once a month for 3 or 4 programs at a time. Then we've got some other community things that we do for our own public affairs. But it sits idle. It can be scheduled and have access to. We've got people who here could be available and resources and that type of thing, lighting and setup. We've got a variety of tables. I mean, a broader table over there and a narrow one's here, and some round, or some octagonal or hexagon or something for 4 or 5 people to be around. Or we've got, you know, furniture, couch furniture here and those kind of things. As well, it could all lend itself to some flexibility in a studio-oriented type program. We could talk about doing a test run and see what it takes to get into the studio. Evening hours are relatively available as well. The thing that causes us the most, I guess, complexity is during the membership campaign times when we're on for 7 or 11 days, and the studio is pretty well socked in with that set, and this is pretty well socked in with the support and the orientation that we do at nighttime for the membership campaigns. Other times the flexibility is really pretty wide. And this is the main studio, and I think it's approximately 60 by 40, large for our most of our needs. But during the membership campaign, we will have 2 or 3 people on set. We'll have a bank of 24 phone operators kind of behind the scenes. We'll run typically 3 cameras, sometimes a 4th camera that we bring in from the field and mount on a boom. So it's a pretty standard large-scale production studio for a city the size of Spokane. We've got kind of behind us what we call an infinity wall. It just kind of blends into the floor, so there's no real sharp lines in the back, and able to put patterns and that type of thing for lighting effects on that. We do it takes a break during the summer, June, July, and August, but we do 9 months of a monthly series called Health Matters, and there will be 4 or 5 people on a set discussing various health topics and concerns. There will be cut-in pieces that are produced in the field, but it's primarily studio-oriented. The setup is kind of large furniture pieces, kind of around in a U or a semicircle shape, and 3 cameras out there with the various cross-shooting and angles. They're shooting in towards the back. I think there is not a solid set behind them, but there are set pieces behind them that appear behind each camera angle, behind each primary camera angle, and then some breaks where there's probably some lights or pattern things that are going on. And they're sitting on risers and carpeted in a little higher elevation for camera angle and those kind of things. During the membership campaign, our people will be standing out here in front of a bank of phone operators. There'll be a green board over here for chroma key, for some kind of special effects and activities that will take place over there. Typically, we went for a studio this large so that we could have studio audiences and guests at times. When we've done political debates, candidate forums, and that type of thing, sometimes we'll have audience members come in and be able to ask questions or comments, or we'll have a panelist of 3 or 4 journalists. So we'll set the 2 candidates or the 3 up in front, and have other panelists off in the back. occasionally we'll have 35 to 40 people in the studio for a studio audience where we can get a microphone to them and a camera shot of them asking questions of guests and talent. Typically the audience is focused back towards that way, towards the west wall. Main speakers are primarily here with the audience there, and the cameras kind of interspersed around. Enough lighting to where we can swing a camera around and get audience participation going as well. And that's the value. Having a studio this large, most of the large studio space in Spokane now is taken up by the entire news set at the commercial station. So occasionally a commercial station has come over and rented the studio for an advertising client or something like that, or an advertising agency will come in and use the space that we've got to do a special shoot because they require a background and that type of thing. But so it's given us a good deal of flexibility in terms of the size and the number of people that we can get in here, so it doesn't quite appear as boxy as the other smaller studio does. I think it would be beneficial if you really wanted to engage the community and get members from the community to come in and participate and ask questions. I mean, we'll have a panel and we'll have a host and we'll have those kind of activities taking place in a little bit more closed, intimate environment. But then we'd like to go to our audience and get our audience thoughts, time to ask you questions and their own individual questions and those kind of things. So we've been able to set up kind of bleacher seating in here at times when we borrowed risers and that type of thing from Ferris, so that there's a tiered seating, and easier lighting, easier to see people when they ask a question, and that type of thing. So it could lend itself towards the occasional a larger audience participation, Q&A from just average Joe and Jane citizens who are taking an interest in the topic beyond what's going on here in the community and here in the panel. Open it up to the community, and I think that's the value of a community dialogue and discourse as well. I mean, it's worked out well, and even at times when we haven't had really direct audience participation, when we've had political candidates, sometimes a couple of their people from their camp, so to speak, will be here and be able to sit and listen and that. But during our last congressional coverage up here with Representative McMorris and candidate Romaine, there was a studio audience, and a couple questions, and no rooting and hollering, but it just kind of lent itself to the fact that this had a little bit of a community forum kind of a aspect to it. We haven't done an awful lot of performance out of here in quite some time. Because for our broadcast we have really music rights issues and things like that. But yeah, this space is certainly large enough. I mean, typically what we see around the parameters of the infinity wall is I don't know, what is that? Maybe 20 by 20 or something like that. This is kind of the primary performance area or where most of the activity takes place, and then the cameras in the background for more appropriate shots and those kind of things. So it's not terribly large for performance, but if it's piano and vocal or a three-piece combo or something like that, maybe even, gosh, I remember in the old days we even did a little stage work one time with some of the high school groups. So you could do that, but it would really take some coordination and planning and shot blocking and things like that. The old formula that we used to use, that it would probably take, if you're doing an hour program, it probably takes 3 to 4 hours of setup and lighting and those kind of things for that caliber of a studio production. And then so then you've got 3 to 4 hours of setup and staging and lighting, and then you've got the actual performance, and then another hour or two to strike it and get out of here. So it's a pretty significant investment. Over here on my right, your left, we've got several stacking chairs. I mean, we've got 40 of those that can be used for audience participation, and we can, on a week or two's notice, we can get a set of risers over from Ferris or something like that. So if there needs to be that kind of support for an audience or a production, we're not I guess we're not rich with set pieces and things, but I mean, several things like this, we can turn around and adapt something on the back, and so they're made to be a little bit mobile and flexible. It's just a good, flexible, functional use of space, and it can house people and conversation and discussion, just kind of like the other studio as well. Smaller, more intimate, but when there's 2 or 3, that's fine. If you need a little bit more space for separation. We don't use them all. I mean, these over here are probably set on, I mean, this is a programmable board, so if the lights aren't moved, when we bring in the pledge set and put the phone operators back there, it's lit and ready to go. They just bring up a certain keys. There's a little mini computer in there, I think, that programs what the lights, what battens come on and what instruments come on and that type of thing. So. But yeah, there's an awful lot here that isn't used at some particular time, but then there's an awful lot that really is used when the studio is especially full with the membership campaign. This was the first studio that KSPS operated out of from 1967 through 1995. It's approximately 30 feet by 40 feet, has a 16-foot grid for lights. The lights are on dimmable panel, so it can be raised and lowered intensity for whatever is required. In the early days, we did 2 or 3 shows out of here a day when we were doing instructional television programming for Spokane schools. And we had a young crew of high school kids and interns running back and forth and just were striking and setting up a lot of sets. And just an awful lot of basically studio-oriented set work. Some were live. There were 2 live a week, and most of them then were recorded and played back for later than a week. Yeah, it was always within a week cycle, so everything was pretty current. It was pretty small by some standards, especially when we moved into the public television side and started to do the membership campaigns and 24 telephone operators and that type of thing. But gosh, in the old days, we did more out of this small studio from 1967 to 95 than I'm sure we'll ever do in the larger studio, just because the way that things have changed. Then, of course, things changed, and portable cameras took us out into the field more, and we were less studio-oriented, less of the traditional talking head and that type of thing. We did, gosh, back when I started many years ago, we were doing we were doing music programs for the adult audience, a program called Seventh Note, and that's back when there were a lot of performers and entertainers coming in through town, and no one paid any attention to music rights and those kind of things. So we do we do single piano, dual piano, Arnie Crothers, and those kind of folks, and Joe Close. They'd be set up basically in here towards this area, because the main entrance, the control room, was on the other side of the wall at that particular time. So everything was kind of oriented here, and studio cameras were on the other side, shooting this way. And we'd have an array of a light blue cyclorama curtain that we have in the other studio that we used an awful lot. Then the black panel curtain. So there wasn't an awful lot of set and sophistication. We did some things with lighting and that. And it's still a pretty basic studio now. We do have more set pieces that we use as backgrounds. So we transitioned out of that, again, cost and crew size and those kind of things in Spokane schools, then transitioned to other forms of instructional classroom material where they bought a lot of product instead of producing their own. So we kind of diminished the use of the studio, and then of course about that time the membership campaign activity for public television came about, so we started to do pretty active membership campaigns 3 or 4 times a year, 5 or 6 times, and we did everything in here as well. We had phone operators just scrunched against the back over here, and we had live talent and people over there, and it was just really jam-packed, and we had typically a 3-camera setup on dollies and pedestals, and would work out of here, stringing mics all over the place. Everything was pretty much a lavalier microphone, or sometimes there was just a boom microphone, which wasn't a terribly sophisticated or a high quality microphone, and they were all wired. We'd mic the individual instruments, pianos, bass, what have you, and it was pretty rudimentary. We did a lot of talking head programs, a lot of just panels and onesies and twosies, talking to one another, particular topics, public affairs. We had a lot of school district programs on the air that were talking. That morphed when Karen left many years ago, and other people took it over, and Hugh Imhoff for a while, and when he was on staff, and other people that we've contracted with. That morphed into Spokane This Week, or Spokane Weekly, where it was kind of a digest of weekly news stories, and we'd bring in the news producers and journalists from other stations and give them an opportunity to talk a little bit more at length about some of the journalism stories that they provided and covered during the week. And that had a good following, but we could just never get financial underwriting support for it. We could just really never continue to pay the bills. Couldn't pay the talent. We couldn't pay the honorarium for the journalists that participated. We just had trouble funding it, and it just kind of died because of lack of funding. Back in those days, there was one called At Issue, which was produced by Karen Dorn, who then left here and went to the newspaper. But she was just a prolific quality studio producer with really good content about community issues. And that was back, I mean, this goes back a long time into the early 70s and Expo 74 and all of that, and kind of the rejuvenation and rebirth of the community. And Karen was marvelous at looking at really solid quality public affairs community issues, and we did some things in the early days of Hanford and the old financial debacle that took place there, some issues with women's rights, and a number of things that Karen had us involved with, and it was really a strong, solid news and public affairs program. Basically, nothing that we've done in that theme ever gets us a high or a strong rating or audience viewership, but in terms of phone calls and letters and mails and things like that, you know you're resonating in some way with some people who've decided that this is for me, this is what I like, this is what we need in our community, and that quality and that level of journalism. In terms of numbers, didn't reach very many people. But in terms of those who thought it was important and valued in terms of the conversations we should have in the community and the decision making, it resonated with those. From people who didn't usually call, who weren't the traditional viewer or the traditional member who was excited about Lawrence Welk or some other Masterpiece Theater or something like that, but really keyed into a quality discussion and community public affairs program. And that's what we miss most today in terms of providing a real alternative service.